You have no idea what it means to lead by example, do you? My words sliced through the silence in Diane's small office behind her cafe. 20 years have passed since she told me I didn't belong in her family, yet the memory still burns. Now she sits across from me, no longer the imposing figure from my childhood, but a woman whose business is failing, whose pride has crumbled enough to seek help from the very organization I built. Her eyes widen slightly. I, I'm just trying to save my business, Sarah. I tap her grant application with my index finger. Your cafe is struggling because you overextended yourself, took out loans without proper planning, and refused to update your marketing or menu. Now you want me to bail you out. Diane's face pales as understanding dawns. You're the one reviewing my application? A humorless laugh escapes me. Ironic, isn't it? The woman who once packed my suitcase and shipped me off to relatives I barely knew now needs my help. The old Diane would have bristled with defiance. This one just looks down at her hands. 20 years can change a person. I should know. But what hasn't changed is the question that has followed me since I was 15. What does it mean to truly belong somewhere? Her office smells of coffee and desperation, a far cry from the vanilla-scented perfection she'd maintained in my father's house. The walls are thin enough that I can hear the muted conversations of customers, the hiss of the espresso machine. Beyond the small window, afternoon light casts long shadows across the floor. It feels fitting somehow. This diminished version of the woman who once loomed so large in my nightmares. I had no idea, she whispers, her fingers nervously adjusting the collar of her blouse. If I had known it was your organization, you wouldn't have applied. I finished for her. I know. Flashback. The rejection. You don't belong in this family. Diane's voice was ice cold that afternoon when I was 15. My suitcase sat packed by the door. My father Thomas hovered nearby, eyes fixed on the floor as always. He wouldn't look at me. I don't understand, I managed, my voice trembling. Why are you sending me away? It's for the best, she said, her tone clipped. You'll be happier with your relatives. This arrangement hasn't worked for any of us. She said it so casually as if uprooting my life was just another item on her to-do list, right between pick up dry cleaning and attend Melissa's recital. I glanced at my father, silently begging him to intervene. Mom had been gone for 6 years, and for a while, it had been just us. We'd been close then. I'd watch him tinker with electronics in his workshop, handing him tools before he even asked for them. He taught me how to build simple circuits, his eyes lighting up when I understood a concept quickly. But that connection faded when Diane entered our lives. A corporate executive with perfectly manicured nails and a smile that never reached her eyes, she'd swept into our messy, grief-stained world with promises of stability and normalcy. What she really wanted was a fresh canvas for her perfect family portrait, one that didn't include reminders of my father's previous marriage. Dad, I whispered. He shifted uncomfortably. Try to understand, Sarah. This will be better for everyone. Everyone. Not me. I remember the precise moment I realized he wouldn't fight for me. The slight slump of his shoulders, the way his eyes darted to Diane for approval. He'd already made his choice, and it wasn't me. Something inside me hardened then, a protective shell forming around the soft, vulnerable part that still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. The living room where this scene played out had once been filled with my mother's things, colorful throw pillows, mismatched bookshelves overflowing with dog-eared paperbacks, framed photos of our family vacations. Diane had methodically erased all traces of her, replacing warmth with sterile elegance. Beige walls, matching furniture sets, artwork chosen to complement the decor rather than speak to the soul. Melissa, Diane's 13-year-old daughter, watched from the staircase, her expression a mixture of discomfort and relief. We had never bonded, Diane had made sure of that, subtly pitting us against each other, lavishing attention on her daughter while finding fault with everything I did. Your things are packed, Diane continued, gesturing to the suitcase by the door. Your aunt and uncle are expecting you this evening. I looked at the suitcase, one suitcase for 15 years of existence. What hadn't fit inside had been deemed unnecessary. Later, I would discover she'd thrown away my mother's old sweater, the one I slept with when nightmares came. Too ratty, she'd explained when I confronted her during a brief visit months later. Unsuitable. Like me. Flashback. The aftermath. That night at my relative's house, I cried until my throat burned. I kept waiting for my phone to ring, for my father to call and say it had all been a terrible mistake, that he was coming to bring me home. The call never came. My relatives weren't cruel, but they weren't warm either. They'd agreed to take me as a favor to my father, not because they particularly wanted another teenager in their home. I was a guest who never left, a responsibility they hadn't asked for but dutifully accepted. Your father just needs time, my aunt told me during those first weeks. Diane comes from a family where appearances matter. Her parents were socially prominent but emotionally distant. She's trying to create the perfect life she never had. Perfect meant no reminders of failure or loss. I was both. My room was in the basement, clean but sparse, with a small window that provided a ground-level view of the driveway. I could see feet passing by, car tires, and occasionally a curious squirrel. At night, I'd stare at that window, imagining headlights pulling up, my father rushing to collect me, to apologize for his momentary insanity. When the fantasies became too painful, I forced myself to stop. I became practical about my survival. I created routines that kept me moving forward. Homework immediately after school, then my part-time job at the local grocery store, then volunteer hours at the community center, then studying until exhaustion granted me dreamless sleep. My cousin, a college freshman who lived at home, occasionally tried to include me in his life, inviting me to movies or to hang out with his friends. But I felt like a charity case, the sad girl with the tragic backstory. I preferred the solitude of the library, where no one expected me to smile or make conversation. I threw myself into school, worked part-time jobs, and volunteered whenever I could. Books became my escape, their pages the only place where I felt truly at home. The library became my sanctuary, its quiet corners offering solace when the weight of not belonging became too heavy to bear. The volunteer coordinator at the community center, an older woman named Mrs. Fernandez, was the first person since my mother who seemed to truly see me. You have a gift for connecting with people, she told me one day after I'd helped organize a resource fair for low-income families. These people feel invisible to the world. You make them feel seen. Her words lingered in my mind, planting a seed that would eventually grow into my life's purpose. My father called every Sunday at exactly 5 p.m. Our conversations were brief, awkward. He asked about school, about whether I needed anything. I answered politely, never telling him what I really needed, him to stand up to Diane, him to bring me home. After 6 months, the calls became monthly. After a year, they stopped altogether. I heard from my aunt that he and Diane had relocated for his job. They didn't leave a forwarding address. Present day. The dilemma, Sarah? Diane's voice pulls me back to the present. I understand if you want to reject my application. I study her face, searching for the cold, calculating woman who had so casually discarded me from her life. Instead, I see someone diminished, her designer clothes replaced by a simple blouse and pants, her once perfect hair now showing strands of gray. This isn't about what I want, I say, my voice steadier than I feel. It's about doing what's right. I open her file again, scanning the details of her cafe's financial struggles. After retiring from corporate life, Diane had sunk her savings into this small business, clearly unprepared for the realities of entrepreneurship. Classic Diane, assuming her corporate success would automatically translate to a new field, too proud to ask for guidance until failure was imminent. My assistant Jessica's words echo in my mind. You're not just deciding her fate. You're setting an example for yourself, for this organization, and for everyone who's ever looked up to you. The irony doesn't escape me. Community Bridges, the nonprofit I built, exists precisely to help people who feel cast aside find their footing again. People like my 15-year-old self. 2 days ago, when I first discovered Diane's application, I'd nearly thrown it in the trash. The shock of seeing her name on our standard form had sent me reeling back through time, to that awful day when she decided I wasn't worthy of being part of her family. My hands had trembled as I flipped through the pages, reading her desperate plea for funding. I'd called Eleanor that evening, my mentor since the early days of Community Bridges. "What's on your mind?" she'd asked, immediately sensing my distress. Diane Fletcher, I'd replied, the name still bitter on my tongue. Your stepmother? What about her? I'd explained the situation, trying to keep my voice level, professional. Part of me wants to throw the application in the trash, I'd admitted. But another part of me feels like, I don't know, like this is some kind of test. Eleanor had been quiet for a moment. Do you think she knows it's your organization? No, I'd said firmly. She wouldn't have applied if she did. Then the question isn't about her, Eleanor had said. It's about you. What kind of person do you want to be in this moment? Her words had hit me hard. I want to do what's right, I'd said, though my voice had wavered. Then take your time, she'd replied. You don't have to decide today. Now, sitting across from Diane, I finally understand what Eleanor meant. This moment isn't about Diane's redemption. It's about my own integrity. I'm willing to approve partial funding, I say finally. But there are conditions. Diane looks up, surprise and cautious hope crossing her face. You'll need to attend mandatory management workshops. You'll implement a new marketing strategy. You'll provide regular progress reports. This isn't charity, Diane. It's a chance to prove you can change. She nods slowly, relief washing over her features. Thank you, Sarah. I won't let you down. I almost laugh at the familiarity of those words. How many times had I said them to my father, to teachers, to anyone who might offer a moment's approval? Always striving, always trying to prove my worth to people who should have valued me from the start. Don't thank me yet, I say, closing her file. The real work is just beginning. Flashback. Building something new. The day I founded Community Bridges was the first time I felt truly purposeful. I was 25, armed with a degree in social work and business management, and a vision born from my own experience of displacement. People need bridges, not walls, I explained to my first small team of volunteers. They need someone who believes in them when they've been told they don't belong. We started small, a cramped office, donated furniture, and boundless determination. Our first success was helping a struggling single mother get funding to finish her nursing degree. When she came back 2 years later, licensed and employed, to donate to our cause, I knew we were onto something meaningful. Each person we helped was another brick in the foundation of my new identity. No longer was I defined by rejection. I was defined by my ability to create spaces where others could belong. The journey hadn't been easy. Our first grant application was rejected. Our second was approved, but for less than half the requested amount. I worked 80-hour weeks, waiting tables at night to support myself while building the organization during the day. I slept on a futon in our office when deadlines loomed, subsisting on vending machine snacks and determination. Jessica joined in our second year, a sharp-minded business major who turned down corporate offers to work for our cause. I want to do something that matters, she'd said during her interview, eyes bright with conviction. She became my right hand, challenging my ideas when necessary, supporting me through setbacks, celebrating our victories with the same fierce joy that fueled our toughest days. As our reputation grew, so did our impact. By 32, Community Bridges had become one of the most respected nonprofits in the region. We managed scholarships, funded local businesses, and helped struggling families rebuild their lives. The work filled me with pride, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. I thought about Diane less and less as the years passed. The wound of her rejection scabbed over, then scarred, then faded to a barely perceptible mark. Or so I believed until her name appeared on that grant application. My personal life remained relatively solitary. I dated occasionally, but never let anyone get too close. Jessica teased me about it sometimes, how I could pour endless compassion into strangers' lives but kept my own heart carefully guarded. Some things break and can't be fixed, I told her once, after a particularly persistent suitor had finally given up. Or maybe they just need the right kind of repair, she counted, ever the optimist. Perhaps that's why Diane's application had shaken me so deeply. It reopened questions I thought I'd resolved, about forgiveness, about healing, about what it means to move on without letting go entirely. At the cafe, following through, a week after our meeting, I returned to Diane's cafe. This time, I'm accompanied by Michael, the business consultant we've assigned to work with her. The place is nearly empty, Just two elderly men playing chess in the corner and a college student with headphones, surrounded by textbooks. Foot traffic is worse between 2 and 4, Diane explains as she leads us to a table. I've tried various promotions, but nothing seems to work. Michael nods, making notes on his tablet. We'll look at your customer data, see if we can identify patterns. The first workshop is tomorrow, right? Diane nods, a flash of anxiety crossing her face. I recognize it immediately, the fear of being judged, of being found wanting. How strange to see my own insecurities reflected in the woman who had once been the source of them. I've never been good at being a student, she admits. I'm used to being in charge. Sometimes the strongest leadership comes from knowing when to listen. I reply, surprising myself with the lack of edge in my voice. She glances at me, something like respect flickering in her eyes. I'm beginning to see that. As Michael continues his assessment, asking about suppliers and expenses, I wander around the cafe. The space itself is pleasant, large windows, comfortable seating, a small bookshelf in the corner. But the menu board is faded, the display case half empty, the walls bare where local art could add character and draw in the creative crowd from the nearby college. I snap a few photos with my phone, making mental notes. Despite myself, I'm thinking like a consultant now, not a wounded child. It's easier this way, focusing on the business, not our history. When Michael steps outside to take a call, Diane approaches me hesitantly. I never thought I'd see you again, she says quietly. Let alone like this. I maintain a professional distance. Life has a way of coming full circle. She nods, twisting a dish towel in her hands. Your father. He regretted how things happened. He just never knew how to fix it. The mention of my father sends an unexpected jolt through me. Is he? He passed away 3 years ago, she says softly. Heart attack. It was sudden. Something inside me deflates. Not grief exactly, that connection had withered long ago, but the final death of possibility. There would never be a reconciliation now, never an explanation or apology. Whatever questions I had would remain forever unanswered. I'm sorry, I say automatically. He kept track of you, you know, she continues. Through mutual friends. He was proud when he heard about your organization, about the good you were doing. I don't know what to do with this information. Pride without presence is meaningless. We should focus on the cafe, I say, changing the subject. That's why we're here. The transformation. The cafe's transformation over the next few months mirrors something shifting inside me. What began as a professional obligation, monitoring Diane's progress, receiving reports from Michael, our business trainer, becomes something more complex. 1 month in, Michael sends me his first comprehensive assessment. She's actually implementing the changes, he notes with surprise. Most clients resist at first, but she's diving in. New menu items, local art on the walls, partnership with the college's music department for weekend performances. She's working harder than people half her age. I find myself checking his reports with increasing interest, comparing the before photos with current images of the cafe. The place is slowly coming alive, not just in decor, but in energy. Customer reviews online have shifted from lukewarm to enthusiastic. She's really taking to the workshops, Michael tells me during one of our check-ins. She's even started mentoring some of her younger staff. It's like she's finally realized what it means to lead by example. At first, I attribute my interest to professional pride, another successful community bridges intervention. But there's something more, a question nagging at the edges of my consciousness. If Diane can change, what does that mean for the narrative I've built around my past? I visit unannounced one afternoon to see for myself. The cafe buzzes with energy I hadn't felt during my first visit. The scuffed floors have been refinished, the menu updated with seasonal offerings. A bulletin board near the entrance features local events and artwork. College students occupy most tables, textbooks spread wide, laptops open. A young barista chats animatedly with customers as she crafts elaborate drinks. And there's Diane, standing at the register, chatting warmly with a customer, a smile on her face that looks genuine, not practiced. She's wearing a simple apron over casual clothes, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail rather than the perfect coif she'd maintained during my childhood. She spots me and waves me over, surprising us both with the gesture. Sarah, I wasn't expecting you. Thought I'd drop by and see how things are going. I reply, glancing around the bustling cafe. Looks like business is good. It is, she says, pride flickering in her eyes. Thanks to you. It's not just me, I say. You did the work. You earned this. Diane hesitates, then nods. Still, I wouldn't have gotten here without your help. A young barista approaches, looking uncertain. Miss Fletcher, we're out of the caramel syrup. Should I run to the supply store or substitute with the vanilla? I expect Diane to make the decision unilaterally, the autocratic manager I'd imagined her to be. Instead, she asks, what do you think, Zoe? You're the one who makes most of the specialty drinks. The girl brightens. I've been experimenting with that homemade salted caramel we tried last week. Customers seem to love it even more than the commercial stuff. Diane nods. Then let's use that. Show Jason how to prepare it, so we always have backup. After the girl leaves, I raise an eyebrow. That's not the management style I expected from you. Shadow crosses her face. I spent decades believing control meant strength. It cost me more than I realized. We sit at a corner table, and for the first time, our conversation feels almost normal. She talks about the challenges of running the cafe, the lessons she's learned, her plans for the future. I didn't think I'd enjoy mentoring, she admits, but it's been rewarding. The younger staff, they remind me of myself when I first started out. It feels good to help them find their way. The irony isn't lost on me. The woman who couldn't make room in her life for a 15-year-old girl now finds fulfillment in guiding others. What happened? I ask suddenly. After I left, with you and my father. Diane's hands tighten around her mug. It wasn't the fairy tale I thought it would be, she says finally. Melissa went through a rebellious phase in high school, drugs, staying out all night. Your father withdrew more and more. We were like three strangers living in the same perfect house. She takes a sip of her coffee. I threw myself into my career, climbed the corporate ladder, became the youngest female VP in the company's history. But the higher I climbed, the emptier I felt. And Melissa? I ask, curious despite myself. She's a therapist now, if you can believe it, Diane says with a small laugh. Specializes in family trauma. Says she was inspired by her dysfunctional home to help others heal. We talk weekly. She's been encouraging me to reach out to you for years, but I never had the courage. Until you needed money, I can't help saying. She accepts the jab with a nod. Until I needed money, she agrees. Though I had no idea it was your organization. The universe has a strange sense of humor. As I leave, she calls after me. Sarah? I turn back. I was wrong, she says simply. About everything. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I don't respond, but something inside me shifts, like a door long rusted shut beginning, ever so slightly, to creak open. Resolution. Setting free 1 month later, I sit at my desk reviewing Michael's latest report on Diane's cafe. Sales have tripled since implementing the new strategies. Employee retention has improved. Customer reviews are glowing. Attached to the email is a photo of Diane behind the counter, smiling as she hands a customer a pastry. She looks genuinely happy, not just proud or determined, but content. I stare at the image for a long time, feeling a mix of emotions I can't quite name. This is what I'd hoped for when I approved the grant, not just financial recovery, but personal growth. Diane has found a way to adapt, to lead, to build something meaningful again. But most importantly, I realize I've found a way to let go. Jessica knocks softly and enters my office, placing a cup of tea on my desk. You've been quiet lately, she says, leaning against the doorframe. Still thinking about Diane? I nod, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. It's strange. For so long, I told myself I didn't care about her or what she thought of me, but now I don't know. Seeing her change, it's harder than I expected. Harder how? Jessica asks, her tone curious. Because it means I can't hold on to the anger anymore, I admit. She's not the same person who sent me away, and that scares me in a way. Jessica smiles gently. Letting go of anger isn't weakness, Sarah. It's strength. It means you're moving forward even if she's still catching up. Her words resonate more than I expected. Maybe Jessica is right. Maybe it is time to let go, not to forgive entirely, but to release the weight of the resentment I've carried for so long. That evening, I receive an email from Diane. It's brief, almost tentative. Sarah, I wanted to thank you for giving me this opportunity. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying. I hope one day I can prove that to you. I stare at the screen, rereading the words until they blur. It isn't much, but it's more than I'd ever expected from her. Progress, Jessica says when I show her the email the next day. Maybe, I reply, though I'm not ready to call it that just yet. That evening, I meet Jessica for dinner to celebrate our organization's recent achievements. Over a plate of pasta, she leans across the table. So, what's next for you? She asks. You've built this incredible nonprofit. You've faced down the ghosts of your past, and you've come out stronger for it. What's the next big thing on your horizon? I smile, considering her question honestly. I think I just want to keep doing what we're doing, helping people, making a difference, but maybe. I trail off, an idea forming. Maybe what? She presses, eyes lighting up. Maybe it's time to expand, I say slowly. Not just grants, but mentorship programs, workshops for people like Diane, business owners who need guidance and support to adapt. Jessica grins. Now that's the Sarah I know, always thinking ahead. 2 days later, I make a decision that surprises even me. I call Diane and invite her to coffee, not at her cafe, but at a neutral location, a small park between our offices. She's already there when I arrive, sitting on a bench, feeding crumbs to eager pigeons. She looks up as I approach, surprise and caution warring on her face. Thank you for meeting me, I say, sitting beside her. Of course, she replies. Is everything okay with the grant? The grant is fine, I assure her. This is personal. Diane goes very still, waiting. I spent years defining myself by what happened between us. I begin. By the rejection, the abandonment. Every success I achieved was partly fueled by a desire to prove you wrong. She winces but doesn't interrupt. But I'm tired of giving the past that much power, I continue. I don't want to forgive you, Diane. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I don't want to be tethered to you by anger either. I understand, she says quietly. I'm not looking for a relationship, I clarify. But I'm willing to acknowledge that you're trying to be a better person now than you were then. That's something, I guess. She nods, her eyes glistening. It's more than I deserve. Maybe, I agree. But it's what I need to move forward completely. We sit in silence for a moment, watching the pigeons squabble over the last of the crumbs. It's not comfortable, exactly, but it's not painful either. Just two people who once hurt each other terribly, finding a way to exist in the same world without continuing the damage. As I walk home that night, the city lights glimmer like stars brought down to earth. The work I've done has always been about more than just grants or numbers. It's about giving people a chance to grow, to change, to become better versions of themselves. Diane's journey has shown me that growth is possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. I don't need closure from her. I've found it in myself. The next morning, I send Michael a reply to his email about the cafe's progress. Great work, I write. Let's keep the momentum going. It isn't flashy or dramatic, but it's enough. For the first time in 20 years, I feel truly free, free to move forward, to dream bigger, and to let the past be just that, the past. I no longer wonder what it means to belong. I've built my own place in the world, one strong enough to include even those who once excluded me. Not because they deserve it, but because I choose it. And in that choice lies a power greater than rejection could ever take away. The crystal whiskey glass shattered against the wall just inches from my head, sending shards cascading across the worn hardwood floor. I didn't flinch. After years of my father's explosive outbursts, I'd become numb to the violence that punctuated his disappointments. You ungrateful little bitch. My father bellowed, his face contorting with rage, veins pulsing at his temples. After everything I've done for you. I stood perfectly still, a strange calm washing over me as I watched him. This man who had once been my hero transformed into someone I barely recognized. The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Everything he'd done for me, for the past 4 years, I'd been the one paying his mortgage while he gambled away whatever money crossed his path. I'm done, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. This ends now. My name is Susan Walker. I'm 53 years old, recently promoted to marketing director at a firm I've dedicated 20 years of my life to, and today is the day I finally stopped being my father's keeper. 6 hours earlier, Dad, I can't give you $15,000, I said, setting my coffee mug down on the small table in his senior living apartment. That's almost my entire retirement cushion. Richard Walker, my 78-year-old father, once the charismatic owner of a successful construction company, now looked at me with the practiced charm that had bailed him out of trouble his entire life. His blue eyes, the same shade as mine, twinkled as he leaned forward. Susie Q, it's not like I'm asking for a handout, he said, using my childhood nickname that now felt like emotional manipulation. The executive suite has a view of the lake. After working my fingers to the bone all my life, don't I deserve some comfort in my golden years? I felt the familiar guilt rising in my chest. He'd been using this tactic since I was a child, masterfully deploying fragments of truth to obscure the larger lies. Yes, he had worked hard once, building his construction business from nothing after returning from Vietnam. I remembered watching him pore over blueprints at our kitchen table, his calloused hands carefully marking measurements. But that was before the gambling started, before he'd risked everything on poker games and horse races. You already have a perfectly good apartment here, I replied, gesturing to the comfortable, if modest, surroundings of his current senior living unit. An apartment that I pay $4,200 a month for, on top of my own expenses. Your father deserves the best, Susan, Linda, my stepmother, interjected as she entered from the kitchenette, bearing a plate of store-bought cookies. At 66, she was 13 years my senior, but had been married to my father for nearly 15 years. She'd been a receptionist at a medical office when they met, just 11 months after my mother's death. Family takes care of family. Family. The word hung in the air, weighted with expectation. I thought of my mother, who had died of cancer 15 years ago. I remembered her final weeks, how she'd pulled me close and whispered, "Take care of yourself first, Susan. Your father will drain you dry if you let him." At the time, I dismissed her warning as the bitterness of a failing marriage. Now, with 2 decades of enabling behind me, I understood exactly what she meant. I already am taking care of family, Linda, I replied, keeping my voice measured. I've been covering Dad's expenses since he lost his retirement fund at the casino 5 years ago. I've postponed my own retirement planning. I've sacrificed my financial security. And I'm not giving you $15,000 to upgrade to a luxury suite when I'm barely funding my own IRA. My father's charming demeanor slipped. You have no idea what it's like to be old and dependent, he snapped. When I was your age, I'd already built a company and put you through college. A company you gambled away, I said quietly. Flashback, 20 years ago. I still remember the day my father called me, his voice uncharacteristically small, to tell me he'd lost the company. I was 33, newly divorced from a brief, childless marriage, and focused on climbing the corporate ladder. The banks were closing, he admitted. Some investments didn't pan out. Later, I would discover these investments were actually high-stakes poker games. My father, who had always loved the thrill of risk, had graduated from the occasional friendly game to underground tables where tens of thousands changed hands in a night. The economic downturn had already weakened his business, but his gambling had delivered the killing blow. I had flown home immediately, stepping into the chaos he'd created. The house where I grew up was filled with past due notices. My mother had been gone just 5 years at that point, and it was clear he had been spiraling ever since. I'll help you sort this out, I promised him, already calculating which of my savings I could tap into. But you need to stop gambling, Dad. Get help, he agreed tearfully, seeming genuinely remorseful. And for almost a year, he did stop. He attended Gamblers Anonymous, found a job with a former competitor, and began rebuilding. I paid off some of his most pressing debts and returned to my life, believing the crisis had passed. Then came Linda. They met at a charity event, married quickly, and soon my father was investing again. The cycle repeated: crisis, promises, temporary improvement, then collapse. But each time, the financial request grew larger and my retirement account grew smaller. Back to the present. I've sacrificed enough, I said firmly, standing up. I won't keep enabling this, Dad. Your social security and pension are enough to cover this apartment. If you want the executive suite, you'll have to find another way to pay for it. Something dark crossed my father's face, an expression I recognized from childhood, the precursor to his rage. Linda saw it too and moved slightly away from him, a well-practiced choreography. You think you're better than me? He growled, his charm completely evaporated. Always judging, just like your mother. The mention of my mother stung, as it always did. He knew exactly where to aim the knife. I'm not giving you the money, I repeated, reaching for my purse. And I think it's time we discussed a change in our arrangement. I can't keep funding this. That's when he grabbed the whiskey glass, a crystal tumbler that had been my grandfather's, and hurled it against the wall. You ungrateful little bitch, he shouted, rising from his chair with surprising agility for a man his age. After everything I've done for you. Linda retreated to the doorway, her face set in a familiar disapproving frown. Susan, why can't you just help him out? She asked, her tone suggesting I was being unreasonable over a trivial matter. The calm that settled over me in that moment was almost surreal. I'd spent decades in this cycle, but something had finally broken. Perhaps it was the shock of seeing my grandfather's heirloom shattered on the floor, or perhaps it was simply that after years of bending, I had finally reached my breaking point. I'm done, I said, my voice steady. This ends now. At Nancy's office. So you just walked out? Nancy asked, leaning forward in her ergonomic office chair. My best friend since college days, Nancy now ran her own psychology practice, specializing in family trauma. Her office walls were lined with degrees and self-help books, many focused on setting boundaries, something I clearly needed help with. I did, I replied, still somewhat surprised at myself. I just left. Nancy nodded approvingly. After 20 years of financial abuse, it's about time, Susan. What's your plan now? I pulled a folder from my bag, one I'd been compiling for months, though I hadn't admitted to myself why. It contained bank statements, transfer receipts, text messages, emails, a meticulous record of my father's financial dependence and manipulation. I've been paying for that senior living apartment in my name, I explained. Legally, I can change the financial arrangement. I'm going to have my lawyer draft paperwork that limits my contribution to what he can't cover with his Social Security and pension. Nancy flipped through the documentation, her professional demeanor briefly giving way to shock. Susan, this says you've given him over $175,000 in the past 5 years alone? I nodded, feeling a fresh wave of disbelief at the figure myself. I kept thinking he'd change. That if I just helped him through this one crisis, he'd finally take responsibility. Classic enabler thinking, Nancy said gently. We've talked about this in theory for years, but seeing it quantified like this. She closed the folder. You know this won't be easy, right? There will be guilt trips, manipulation, family members taking sides. I thought about my cousins, my aunts, how they might react when my father inevitably painted himself as the abandoned elderly parent. I know, I sighed. But I'm 53, Nancy. If I don't stop this now, I'll never be able to retire. I'll spend my golden years working at Walmart while he lives in luxury. And that's reason enough, she affirmed. But beyond the financial aspect, this is about your emotional well-being too. You've been carrying his burdens for decades. It's time to put them down. The legal process. The following week was a blur of activity. I met with an elder law attorney who helped me draft the necessary paperwork to modify the financial arrangements at my father's senior living facility. No longer would I be paying the entire bill. Instead, my contribution would be the difference between his income and the cost of his current apartment, not the executive suite he coveted. Will he be evicted if he doesn't make up the difference? I asked the attorney, a kind-faced woman in her 60s who specialized in these difficult family situations. No, she assured me. The facility has options for residents whose finances change, including payment plans and even financial aid for long-term residents. Your father won't be homeless, Susan. The relief that washed over me was immediate. Despite everything, I didn't want him suffering. I just couldn't sacrifice my future anymore. When the paperwork was delivered to my father's apartment, the backlash was swift and vicious. My phone exploded with texts and calls, first from him, then from Linda, and finally from extended family members who'd heard his version of events. How could you do this to your own father? He gave you everything, and this is how you repay him? What kind of daughter abandons her elderly parent? Each message was like a knife, expertly aimed at my deepest insecurities. I found myself second-guessing my decision, the lifetime of conditioning threatening to override my resolve. Block them, Nancy advised when I showed her the messages. At least temporarily. Give yourself space to breathe. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the block button. It felt so final, so irrevocable. But then I remembered the shattered glass, the years of manipulation, the draining of my retirement savings. I pressed block. That night, I spread all my documentation across Nancy's dining table, double-checking that everything was in order. The financial records were airtight, and the evidence of my father's gambling problem painted a clear picture of why this step was necessary. You've covered all your bases, Nancy said, scanning the papers. If they try to fight this, they don't stand a chance. Thanks, I replied, managing a small smile. I just wish it didn't have to come to this. You gave them every chance to change, she reminded me. This isn't on you, Susan. It's on them. Her words gave me some comfort, but the weight of the situation still pressed down on me. Even though I knew I was doing the right thing, part of me couldn't shake the sadness of it all. This wasn't just about money. It was about years of hurt and disappointment finally coming to a head. The unexpected call. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from the lawyer handling the financial arrangements. Susan, I wanted to let you know that your father reached out to us. He's trying to contest the changes, claiming that he's entitled to the full payment. I clenched my jaw. Did he provide any proof of an agreement? No, the lawyer said, and he doesn't have a leg to stand on. The payments were voluntary on your part, but I wanted to give you a heads up. This could get messy before it's resolved. Thanks for letting me know, I said. As I hung up, a new wave of determination surged through me. If my father wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time I wasn't backing down. Over the next week, I focused on organizing my evidence more thoroughly. Bank statements, text messages, proof of my payments. It was all there, a clear trail that outlined exactly how much I'd done for him. Nancy helped me sort through it all. Susan, she said, holding up a particularly damning set of texts where my father had promised to stop gambling if I paid his bills. This alone shows how manipulative he's been. You've got nothing to worry about. I know, I said, exhaling slowly, but it's still exhausting. I can't believe it's come to this. Fighting my own father just to protect myself. You're not fighting him, she said firmly. You're standing up for yourself. There's a difference. Later that evening, I received an email from the lawyer with copies of my father's challenge to the proceedings attached, a rambling letter filled with half-truths and outright lies. He claimed I'd only paid his living expenses as a favor, and that he'd always intended to pay me back, though he conveniently provided no evidence of such an arrangement. It was frustrating to read, but also oddly freeing. His letter was desperate, full of holes, and completely unsupported. For the first time, I realized how little power his words held over me when I didn't let them. I replied to the lawyer, attaching additional documentation that refuted every claim in the letter. By the time I hit send, I felt lighter, like I was finally taking control of a situation that had controlled me for far too long. The confrontation, 2 weeks after the paperwork was delivered, I returned to the senior living facility. Part of me hoped to avoid a confrontation, but I knew that was unlikely. My father was waiting in the living room, sitting in his favorite recliner with a TV remote in one hand and a fresh whiskey in the other. Linda hovered nearby, wringing her hands. So you're really going through with this? He demanded as soon as I entered. Yes, I said simply. The new arrangement is fair, Dad. You'll still have this apartment, but I won't be funding upgrades or extras anymore. Fair? He spat the word. You think it's fair to change the rules on an old man? After I sacrificed everything to give you a good life? You did give me a good childhood, I acknowledged, separating the father he had been from the man before me now. And I've shown my gratitude by supporting you financially for 20 years. But I need to think about my own future now. Your future? Linda interjected. What about our future? Richard isn't well, you know that. She lowered her voice dramatically. His heart condition. I almost laughed. The heart condition was a convenient fiction they deployed for years when other tactics failed. My father's last physical had given him a clean bill of health. His medical care is covered by Medicare, I reminded her. And his living expenses will still be covered between his income and my contribution. My father stood up, his face flushing with anger. You think you're better than me, don't you? He spat. You're just like your mother, always looking for a way to make me the bad guy. I held his gaze, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice unwavering. This isn't about being better or worse, Dad. It's about boundaries. I've let you take advantage of me for years, but I'm done. If you want more than I'm giving, you'll have to find it elsewhere. He didn't respond, just sat back down with a grunt. You'll regret this, he muttered. No, I said, turning toward the door. I won't. As I walked out of the apartment, a strange sense of peace settled over me. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, it felt like mine. The aftermath. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I thought my father or Linda would launch into another round of frantic calls or try to intimidate me into reversing my decision. Instead, there was silence. Part of me wondered if they were in denial, thinking I'd changed my mind or that the legal process would somehow fall apart. But I knew better. I'd done my homework, covered every detail, and ensured that the law was firmly on my side. One morning, I received an email from the lawyer handling the case. Your father has not filed any formal objections to the new arrangement, she wrote. The facility has accepted the terms, and his current accommodations will continue with the adjusted payment structure. The news brought a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because it confirmed that I was finally free of this toxic cycle, and sadness because, deep down, I still wish things had turned out differently. Nancy invited me out for lunch to celebrate the progress. Here's to Susan finally setting boundaries and reclaiming her life, she said, raising her glass. I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. It's about time, isn't it? You're handling this so much better than I would, she admitted. If it were me, I'd probably be plastering financially independent at last billboards all over town just to make a point. That's tempting, I admitted, smiling. But I think the paperwork does the talking for me. As we ate, Nancy leaned forward, her expression turning serious. How are you, though? Really? I paused, considering her question. I feel lighter, I said finally. It's like I've been carrying this weight for so long, and now I'm starting to let it go. But it's also bittersweet. They're my family, you know. I wish they'd made different choices. That's on them, Nancy said firmly. You've done more than enough. It's okay to let go. As the weeks passed, I drove by the senior living facility occasionally, wondering how my father and Linda were adjusting. I didn't stop, didn't reach out. I needed this distance to heal, to rediscover who I was outside of my role as my father's keeper. New beginnings. 3 months after the confrontation, I sat on my apartment balcony with my morning coffee, looking out at the city skyline. For the first time in years, I felt truly present, not constantly worrying about my father's next crisis. I had begun to reconnect with parts of my life I'd put on hold. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or energy for. I started spending my weekends exploring new hiking trails, breathing in the fresh air, and letting myself feel truly alive. The changes weren't just internal. I'd met with a financial advisor who helped me create a plan to rebuild my retirement savings. It would take time, but for once, the future looked promising rather than bleak. Occasionally, Linda would send a text, usually a thinly veiled attempt to extract more money. Richard misses you, she'd write. He's been talking about that Alaskan cruise you always promised to take him on. I never remembered making such a promise, but it was typical of their revisionist history. I'd respond politely but briefly, never engaging with the implicit request. To my surprise, my father had reluctantly begun attending the Senior Living Facility's Gambling Addiction Support Group. I harbored no illusions about miraculous transformation, but when the facility director mentioned it during a routine billing call, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps setting boundaries had been good for him too. Our relationship remained strained, but not severed. I began visiting once a month, brief, civil encounters that were carefully bounded. No money was discussed, no past grievances rehashed. It wasn't warm, but it was sustainable. Epilogue. 6 months later. You'll never guess what I did yesterday, I told Nancy as we sat in our favorite cafe, brochures for an Alaskan cruise spread between us. What's that? She asked, sipping her latte. I booked the cruise, I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. First class cabin, just like I always dreamed. Nancy beamed. Susan Walker taking a vacation? The world must be ending. I laughed, realizing how foreign the concept of self-indulgence still felt to me. It's still 6 months away, but having it on the calendar. It makes everything real, you know? I do know, she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You deserve this. You've earned it. As we chatted about excursion options and packing lists, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The shattered whiskey glass, the painful confrontations, the legal battles, they had been necessary steps on a path to freedom. I hadn't wanted any of it, but I needed all of it. You look different, Nancy observed, studying my face. Lighter. I considered this. I feel lighter, I agreed. For so long, I thought taking care of him meant sacrificing everything. I confused enabling with love. And now I understand that real love includes boundaries, I said. I can care about him without being responsible for him. Nancy raised her mug in a toast. To boundaries, she said. And to your Alaskan adventure. I clinked my cup against hers, feeling the unfamiliar but welcome sensation of looking forward rather than back. At 53, I was finally learning that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to set boundaries, to put down burdens that were never yours to carry. My father would always be my father, with all the complexity that entailed. But I was no longer his keeper, his bank, his emotional punching bag. I was simply his daughter, an independent woman with her own life, her own dreams, and now, finally, her own future. As we left the cafe, I paused to take a photo of the autumn leaves swirling across the sidewalk. The image captured more than just the seasonal beauty. It captured a moment of transition, of letting go, of moving forward. This was my life now, and for the first time in decades, it truly felt like mine. We need you to take care of Patty after I'm gone. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, not just for my father who sat across from me, his once commanding frame now hollowed by cancer, but for any hope I'd foolishly nurtured about this reunion. 30 years of silence, and this was what they wanted. Not reconciliation. Not forgiveness. My checkbook. I set my water glass down with deliberate care, though what I really wanted was to hurl it against the wall. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. You called me back after 30 years to ask me to financially support my 53-year-old sister? My mother, Elizabeth, reached across the table as if to touch my hand, then seemed to think better of it. Ellie, please understand. Your father is dying. Patty has never. She's never had to support herself. I glanced at my sister, who sat beside our mother looking every bit the pampered child in her designer outfit, though the years had added weight to her frame and lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. Some things never change. And whose fault is that? I asked, the calm in my voice belying the storm inside me. The silence that followed was my answer. As a child, I thought there was something wrong with me, I continued, surprising myself with this sudden candor. Something that made me unlovable, unworthy of the same attention and care you lavished on Patty. It took years of therapy to realize the problem was never with me. It was with you. Richard's eyes flashed with a hint of the authority that had once terrified me. You always were dramatic, he said, his voice weaker but still carrying that note of dismissal that had colored my childhood. Always making everything about yourself. Flashback, growing up invisible. Memory is a strange thing. For years, I'd carefully packed away my childhood like delicate china, too fragile to handle. But now, that packing has come undone, and fragments of the past cut through me with surprising sharpness. I was always the responsible one, the independent one. I had to be. From the time Patty was born, just 2 years after me, it was clear who the favorite was. Every birthday, every Christmas, every ordinary day, the pattern was the same. Patty got the new toys, the prettier clothes, the bigger portion of dessert. I got the hand-me-downs, the practical gifts, the lectures about being a big sister and how I needed to set an example. I remember one Christmas morning. I must have been about 10. I'd asked for a bicycle for months, dropping hints, leaving catalog pages marked strategically around the house. Christmas came, and there it was. A beautiful red bike with streamers on the handlebars for Patty. I got a set of encyclopedias because you're so smart, Ellie, and education is important. The encyclopedias were useful, yes, but they weren't what dreams are made of when you're 10. My father had his own company, a regional manufacturing business that did well enough to keep us in the upper middle class neighborhood of our Ohio town. He was gone most days before I woke and returned after dinner, his mood determined by the day's sales figures and client meetings. Elizabeth maintained the house with militant efficiency and doted on Patty with equal fervor. There was little room for me in this perfectly balanced equation. Your father works so hard to provide for this family, my mother would say when I questioned anything. The least you can do is be grateful and not cause trouble. Trouble, I learned, was defined as anything that disrupted the family narrative, that we were happy, that we were normal, that we were exactly what a family should be. When Patty wanted my new colored pencils in third grade, Mom made me share them. You know how sensitive your sister is, she'd say, while Patty smirked behind her back. When she broke my favorite book by throwing it in the pool during a tantrum, Dad just said, accidents happen, and bought her an ice cream to cheer her up. The book had been a gift from my favorite teacher, and I'd spent hours reading it under my covers with a flashlight. No one bought me a replacement. When she got better grades, they threw parties. Look how smart our little girl is, they'd crow, while I sat in the corner with my straightest that were just expected. When I got better grades, they just nodded and said, that's what we expect from you, Ellie. You're older. You should be setting the example. I learned early on that if I wanted something, I had to get it myself. Flashback the phone incident. At 16, I started working at a local cafe. The owner, Grace Mitchell, became more of a mentor to me than my own mother ever was. She was in her early 60s then, with laugh lines around her eyes and strong, capable hands that could juggle multiple orders and still find time to squeeze my shoulder encouragingly when I had a rough day. You've got something special, kiddo, she'd tell me. Don't let anyone dim your light. Grace taught me about responsibility, about saving money, about standing up for myself. I saved every penny, dreaming of the day I could build my own life, far from the shadow of Patty's perpetual sunshine. The phone incident was what really opened my eyes to how deep the favoritism ran. I'd saved for months to buy myself a smartphone, nothing fancy, just a basic model for $100 that I'd earned one tip at a time. The day I brought it home, Patty threw a fit. But I want one too, she wailed, reaching for my phone with grabbing hands. Ellie, give it to me. You're so selfish. No, I said firmly, holding it out of reach. I bought this with my own money. You can save up for one too. You can get a job like I did. Mom. Dad. Patty screamed, her face turning red. Ellie's being mean. They came running, of course. They always came running when Patty called. Mom from the kitchen, Dad from his study, both looking concerned about their precious baby's distress. Eleanor, my father said sternly, his face etched in that disappointment I knew so well. Why are you being selfish? Your sister just wants to see your phone. Because it's mine, I replied, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. I worked for it. I earned it. Every single dollar. You're supposed to love your sister, my mother added, her disappointment evident. How can you be so cruel? We raised you better than this. I looked at them, really looked at them, and something clicked into place. This wasn't normal. This wasn't fair. This wasn't love. This was something else entirely, and I was done pretending it was okay. I do love her, I said quietly, steel in my voice, but that doesn't mean I have to give her everything I own. I went to my room and locked the door, ignoring their calls and Patty's fake sobs that I knew would soon turn to demands for something else. That night, I started researching colleges in other states, dreaming of escape. I opened a new document on my computer and typed college applications at the top. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life where I mattered, where my achievements were celebrated, where I was seen for who I really was. Somewhere in that moment, a seed of determination took root, a fierce, unshakable resolve that would ultimately carry me through the next 30 years. I just didn't know it yet. Flashback, the breaking point. I remember the day the acceptance letter came like it was yesterday. I was 18, had just graduated high school, and my hands were shaking as I opened the envelope from the investment management program in Arizona. Grace watched me from behind the cafe counter. She knew how much this meant to me. I got in, I whispered, then louder. I got in. Grace hugged me tight. I never doubted you for a second, kiddo. The letter offered a partial scholarship, which was more than I'd hoped for. I'd need about $30,000 to cover the rest of the expenses. It should have been no problem. I knew about the money Grandpa had left before he died. He'd made it clear it was for both his granddaughter's education. I'd been there when he told Mom and Dad, make sure both girls get their schooling. That's what this money is for. Grandpa had been different from the rest of the family, stern but fair, with a clear-eyed pragmatism that came from building his business from nothing during the post-war years. He'd always treated Patty and me exactly the same, and I treasured that rare quality. I drove home that day full of hope. Maybe this would be the moment things changed. Maybe they'd be proud of me. Maybe they'd finally see me. I found them in the living room. Patty sprawled on the couch texting, while Mom and Dad watched TV. I got accepted, I announced, holding up the letter. The investment management program in Arizona. They're even giving me a partial scholarship. Mom muted the TV. Dad shifted in his chair. Patty didn't even look up from her phone. That's nice, honey, Mom said, but something in her tone made my stomach drop. But Arizona is so far away. The program is exactly what I want to do, I explained, and with Grandpa's money for the remaining tuition. About that, Dad interrupted, clearing his throat. We don't have that money anymore. The world seemed to tilt sideways. What do you mean? Grandpa left that money specifically for our education. Both of us. Well, Mom said, smoothing her skirt. We had to make some choices. Investment opportunities came up. And what about Patty's college fund? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see it in their faces. Dad actually laughed. Don't worry about your sister's education. We've got that covered. I looked at them, really looked at them, at Mom's expensive jewelry, at Dad's new golf clubs in the corner, at Patty's designer clothes and latest iPhone. You're telling me, I said slowly, that you spent the money my grandfather left for my education on stuff. On yourselves? Watch your tone, Dad warned. No, I shouted. I won't watch my tone. This is wrong. This is so wrong. Grandpa wanted that money to go to both of us. Get out, Mom snapped. Just get out until you can speak to us with respect. I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. I drove to the cafe, tears blurring my vision, and worked my shift. The next day was my regular morning shift at the cafe. I went through the motions, making coffee and serving breakfast, trying to figure out what to do next. Grace noticed something was wrong but didn't push. That's why I loved her. When I got home that afternoon, my key wouldn't work in the lock. I tried again and again, but it wouldn't turn. That's when I noticed my suitcases, the old ones from the basement, sitting by the door. They were stuffed with my clothes, some haphazardly folded, others just shoved in. Mom? I called out, knocking. Dad? You're not welcome here anymore, Mom's voice came through the door. We won't have that kind of disrespect in this house. Are you serious? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're kicking me out because I was upset that you stole my college money? Don't be so dramatic, she replied. You're 18 now. An adult. Time to figure things out on your own. I stood there staring at those suitcases, trying not to cry. Cars passed by on our street. Neighbors who'd known me my whole life driving past like nothing was wrong, like my parents hadn't just thrown me out. What about Patty? I asked, my voice breaking. Would you ever do this to her? There was no answer, just silence. And in that silence was everything I needed to know about my place in this family. Flashback, a new beginning. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called my Aunt Sophia, Mom's sister. She answered on the second ring. Ellie? What's wrong? You sound upset. I told her everything, my words tumbling out between sobs, about the college acceptance, about Grandpa's money, about being locked out. Stay right there, she said firmly. Your Uncle William and I are coming to get you. Aunt Sophia had always been different from my mother, more independent, more outspoken. She'd pursued a career in teaching while my mother had married young and devoted herself to being the perfect housewife. There had always been a tension between them, a subtle competition I'd never fully understood until that moment. 45 minutes later, their car pulled up. Uncle William loaded my suitcases into the trunk while Aunt Sophia hugged me tight. I'm so sorry, sweetie, she whispered. This isn't right. That night, sitting in their guest room, Aunt Sophia and Uncle William came in with a check. We want to help with your college tuition, Aunt Sophia said. It's not everything, but it's what we can do. I'll pay you back, I promised through tears. Every penny. We know you will, Uncle William said, because unlike some people, we know exactly who you are and what you're capable of. I looked at that check, $30,000, enough to cover what the scholarship didn't, enough to change my life. But more than the money was what they'd given me. Validation that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't wrong, that the problem had never been me. The next 30 years passed like a dream I'd built with my own two hands. College was tough but exhilarating. I threw myself into my studies, working part-time at the university's financial office to cover living expenses. Every semester, I made the dean's list. Every summer, I landed prestigious internships, and every month, I put aside money to repay Aunt Sophia and Uncle William. During those 4 years, my phone never rang with calls from my parents or Patty. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering what they were doing, but then I'd remember the suitcases on the doorstep and force myself to focus on my future instead. My first job offer came 2 months before graduation, a junior position at Goldman Investment Partners in Chicago. The starting salary was more than I'd ever dreamed of. The day I signed the contract, I called Aunt Sophia. I did it, I told her, my voice shaking with excitement. They want me to start right after graduation. Of course they do, she said, and I could hear the pride in her voice. You're exceptional, Ellie. You always have been. 3 years in, I made senior analyst. 2 years after that, investment manager. My salary doubled, then tripled. I moved from my studio to a luxury apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. I bought my first Mercedes, a sleek black C-Class that made me smile every time I saw it in the parking garage. I paid off my debt to Aunt Sophia and Uncle William in full, though they tried to refuse the money. We didn't help you, so you'd pay us back, Aunt Sophia protested. I know, I told her. You helped me because you love me. But I'm paying you back because I love you too, and because I keep my promises. Present day, the confrontation. I stood up from the dinner table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Let me get this straight. You called me here after 30 years of silence to ask me to financially support my fully capable adult sister? Ellie, please sit down, Mom pleaded. You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be. More dramatic? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You kicked me out of this house. You left my belongings in suitcases on the doorstep. You spent my college money, money that Grandpa specifically left for my education, and now you want me to support Patty? Patty spoke up, her voice whiny despite being 53 years old. It's not fair that you have so much money and won't share it. You've always been selfish. I turned to look at her, really look at her. Designer dress, expensive jewelry, perfectly manicured nails, all paid for by our parents, even now when she was an adult. What exactly have you been doing these past 30 years, Patty? I asked. While I was working 60-hour weeks building my career, what were you doing? I've been finding myself, she replied defensively. Not all of us want to be corporate slaves. Finding yourself on mom and dad's dime? I shook my head. And now that dad's sick, you're worried about losing your meal ticket, aren't you? Don't talk to your sister that way. Mom snapped. She's sensitive. She needs. She needs to grow up. I shouted. She needs to learn how to support herself. She needs to stop depending on everyone else to fund her lifestyle. Dad's fist hit the table, though with less force than I remembered from childhood. Enough. I'm dying, Ellie. My last wish is to know that my youngest daughter will be taken care of. And what about your oldest daughter? I asked quietly. Did you ever want to take care of me? The silence that followed was deafening. I grabbed my purse from the back of my chair. I'm leaving, I announced. This was a mistake. Ellie, please. Mom followed me to the door. Think about what you're doing. Think about your father's last wish. I turned to face her. For a moment, I saw her as she truly was, not just the mother who had failed me, but a woman shaped by her own upbringing, her own insecurities, her own flawed understanding of love. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but for the first time, I could see her as a whole person, not just the villain in my story. I'll help pay for Dad's medical bills if he needs it, I said, my voice steady. But I will not support Patty. That's my final answer. I walked out to my car, ignoring my mother's calls and my sister's dramatic sobs. As I drove away, I pulled over after a few blocks and called my aunt. They want me to support Patty, I said when she answered. Can you believe that? Oh, Ellie, she sighed. I was afraid it might be something like that. Your sister hasn't worked a day in her life, and your parents, they've enabled her for so long. Present day. The truth revealed. The next 2 days were a blur of angry calls and text messages. My mother and sister bombarded my phone with guilt trips and accusations. You're killing your father with your selfishness, Mom texted. You've always been jealous of me, Patty wrote. You're just trying to punish me. I saved every message but didn't respond. Something told me I might need them later. When Mom called again, I turned on my phone's recording before answering. Ellie, she started immediately. How can you be so cold, so selfish? Your sister needs you. I'm willing to help, Dad, I replied calmly. But Patty is an adult. She needs to support herself. You're not worth your sister's little finger, Mom spat. We should never have called you. Her words cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. I ended the call and sat in my hotel room staring out at the small town that had once been my entire world. Then I opened my laptop and went to my mother's social media page. There it was, a long post about her heartless daughter who refused to help her dying father. The comments were filled with relatives and family friends expressing their shock and disappointment in me. Something snapped inside me. 30 years of silence, and this was how they wanted to play it. Fine. I wrote my own post, attaching screenshots of the text and the recorded call. I told the whole story, the childhood favoritism, the stolen college money, the eviction, everything. I ended it with the truth about their recent contact, not that they wanted to reconcile, but that they wanted me to financially support my able-bodied adult sister. As my finger hovered over the post button, I thought about what Grace from the cafe had told me years ago. Some people will never see you clearly, Ellie, no matter what you do. At some point, you have to stop performing for an audience that isn't watching. I clicked post and closed my laptop. Whatever happened next, I had spoken my truth. I didn't need their validation anymore. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in, people expressing their shock not at me this time, but at my parents. Family members I hadn't spoken to in years reached out privately, many sharing their own stories of witnessing the favoritism but never speaking up. Mom tried to defend herself in the comments, but each explanation just dug her deeper. Even her closest friends couldn't justify asking one daughter to support another perfectly capable adult. 6 months later, Aunt Sophia called to tell me Dad had passed away. Mom hadn't invited me to the funeral, one final act of petty revenge. I sent a large bouquet of flowers anyway, with a card that read simply, "Goodbye, Dad." For all his flaws, he had been my father. I remembered moments from my childhood, him teaching me to ride a bike, his rare smile when I brought home perfect grades, the time he'd taken me fishing, just the two of us. Small moments of connection buried beneath years of disappointment and favoritism. I mourn not just his death, but the relationship we might have had if he'd been able to see me clearly. Epilogue. Moving forward. That was 3 months ago. Through Aunt Sophia, I hear that mom is struggling to maintain their lifestyle on what dad left her. Patty throws tantrums about not being able to afford her usual shopping sprees and restaurant meals. Sometimes I wonder if they've learned anything from all of this. Last week, I got another call from an unknown number. This time, I let it go to voicemail. It was Patty asking if I'd reconsider helping her, just until she gets on her feet. I deleted the message without responding. Sitting in my office now, looking at the life I built for myself, I feel at peace with my decisions. I'm sorry I never got to truly reconcile with Dad, but I'm not sorry I stood my ground. Some people might call me cold or unforgiving, but I learned long ago that maintaining healthy boundaries isn't the same as being cruel. I glance at the photo on my desk, me with Aunt Sophia and Uncle William at my last birthday celebration. They're my real family, the ones who believed in me, supported me, loved me unconditionally. Blood might be thicker than water, as they say, but love is thicker than blood, and real love doesn't come with conditions or price tags. Next week, I'm taking a sabbatical from work, 6 months to travel, to write, to think about what I want from the second half of my life. At 30, I was focused solely on proving myself, on building a fortress of success so impenetrable that no one could ever hurt me again. Now, at 55, I find myself asking different questions. What brings me joy? What legacy do I want to leave? Who am I beyond my achievements? Maybe that's the gift in all of this. The realization that I'm finally free to live for myself, not in reaction to or in spite of my family's expectations. Free to define success on my own terms. My phone buzzes, a text from Aunt Sophia asking if I'm still coming for Sunday dinner. I smile and text back a quick yes. Wouldn't miss it. Some bridges stay burned for a reason, but others grow stronger with time. I've learned to know the difference.